Excellent. So we're all interested in working to cultivate young singers and to support them in their training and also sometimes later on in their careers. So how many of you are actually teachers? And how many of you are aspiring singers? Oh, well, that's a bigger group. Well, good for you for being here and being interested in this subject. Excellent. So let's start with training. Let's start with what happens at the start, at the very beginning, before there have hopefully been any problems. Can you briefly outline what you try to bring to singers in the early stages of their training?
Yes. So for contemporary teaching, I think it's absolutely vital for students to understand the importance of technique, the importance of really understanding your body from a nutritional body, mind, spirit aspect, and also just getting the basic foundation of understanding your voice.
So, and are there, and the technical aspects of your work, are they wildly different from other types of teaching voice, would you say?
Not at all. There's a foundation of technique and a basis from, I studied Richard Miller, bel canto singing. So in the beginning stages of that foundation, I feel strongly that we all have similarities.
Fabulous. And Julia?
I agree that there is a foundation beginning principally with management of air. That's what your voice is. It's how you manage the air. For an opera singer, there's a longer timeline to get to the professional level because our demands are, in terms of stamina and volume, unamplified volume, are a bit on the Olympic level of voice production. So in that sense, it's usually at least 10 years of study, right, I would say, before you're able to embark on a career. So that puts most people in their mid to late 20s before they're even ready, which has issues of its own, since most school ends at age 22. This is where the Ryan Center takes singers and helps them through that last phase of study. But the particular issues of learning to sing are the fact that this, using the voice, it's a primary mode of expression as human beings. It's embedded in a body, and the body is taking place in a life, and life influences the body and the voice. So you have to be holistic in the way you look at singing and treat all parts of your life as part of your singing. So it really gets very self-centered in a way, but it's necessary to reach the Olympic levels that we have to reach.
So Melissa, unlike us, you're probably getting students who have sung a ton of music theater in high school, and sometimes not particularly well. So you may have different challenges when you have incoming freshmen. So what do you do with your youngest students?
I do. There's a wonderful textbook that when I was teaching a vocal pedagogy course, so I'm going to steal its title, The Diagnosis and Correction of Vocal Faults. You look at it, you look at a student, you say, you're sounding weird because of this, and then you have to, so that's diagnosis, and then you have to figure out how you're going to correct it, pedagogically and technically, and then you have to translate that into a language that they can understand. So sometimes it's great to have somebody who's never sung before because they're not undoing habits. Sometimes it's great to be able to build on awesome things they did. Everybody does, myself included. I do some things well and some things horribly. So it's working with everybody uniquely and making sure that the foundation is built in a way that you can continue, right? And so taking people from where they start and, like I said, fixing it so that we're ready to channel forward.
I like that three-pronged idea that you sort of, it's a perception, the diagnosis, and then the prognosis, and then you fix it. Dr. Bastian, talk about basic vocal hygiene. So when somebody comes to you as a kid and says, I want to be a singer, what kind of habits will you instill in them?
Well, I think that every singer, because your instrument is inside your body, has to know basic things about that instrument. And I don't think it has to become, a lifelong, deep, detailed study, but you have to understand the idea of tissue. You have to understand the idea of mechanical decoupling of the surface tissue from the underlying, so that you're maintaining that surface tissue in very good condition. You have to understand hydration, and that hydration isn't something that's instant. There are lots of singers who think that, oh, I just take a drink and now I'm hydrated. But hydration goes to the stomach, is redistributed to the larynx from the stomach, from the bloodstream, not by taking it through the throat. So they're just basic things that people have to understand about vibration and tissue and wetness and vibratory collisions. And I think that all of that comes very quickly when singers see their own mechanism. So that's a luxury that we have these days, that people actually look and you can do a basic lesson in vocal physiology
We probably
right from the screen.
all have our own histories on
Yes.
somebody's computer somewhere. Oh yeah, that was 5 years ago. I remember that. We're talking about a scope that can show you your vocal folds as they move and how they look.
And a lot of online resources too, so that
Yeah.
singers can really acquaint themselves with what it is that is happening when they're producing voice.
So I never heard this description, what you just said about the separating, the decoupling the tissue. Can you describe that for these young singers, what you mean by that?
Sure. Well, an oscillating system, any oscillating system, requires two parts. And there's a second part. The second part has to be decoupled from the first part. And the analogy I like to use is the child's paddle ball. You know, the wooden paddle moves this much, but the red rubber ball moves this much. Well, that's exactly what the mucosa of the vocal cords is doing. It is moving with a degree of freedom from the underlying muscle and ligament. And so when that surface tissue becomes thick or stiff, it doesn't move with the same freedom. So you must maintain, in the same way that an oboe player really puts huge time and attention on that reed, or the clarinet player, you have to really maintain the health of the mucosa. That's very key. And that's where the majority of problems arise for singers, is that they injure inadvertently, unintentionally, they injure that surface tissue. So it's like trying to play a clarinet or an oboe with a tattered reed. And so that you can drive it to a certain point, but it's much better to keep it in really great shape.
Do you all know what he's referring to? What tissue, which tissue? So the vocal folds that we're talking about, the edges of the vocal folds, which now I hear is going back. We grew up saying vocal cords.
Yes.
And now my understanding is it's going back to vocal cords because folds never caught on.
It never caught on.
So, but anyway, just keeping that moist, so staying humid. What other things would you tell them to be careful about or avoid or
Well, you know, every singer is worried about the illnesses that come along, but those are not actually the thing that you should worry about the most. The way to deal with illness, by the way, is to avoid it. And the way to avoid it is to be careful with your hands, because most illnesses don't just come magically through the air, they come through our hands. So I try to teach singers to be very aware of where your hands have been and never touch your face unless you've just washed your hands, because you can just try to avoid all that. But the main issue for professional singers is to understand a concept that I call the vocal overdoer syndrome. So performers who are by nature, on average, quite extroverted and sociable and dynamic, and they are communicators. So a higher percentage than in the general population, I would say, are very social, friendly, talkative, extroverted people. So that means that the inner desire to use voices is great, but then the extrinsic invitation to use voice is also great because of performance and rehearsal and so forth. So your biggest enemy, as I see it, is the vocal overdoer syndrome. It's the idea that the amount, manner, and spacing of voice use, the amount is the sheer number of minutes or hours that you're using voice. The manner is the way you're producing voice. If you're producing voice very well, because of the help of your teachers, you have far greater endurance than if you're producing voice poorly. So it's the amount, it's the manner, and it's the spacing that the voice needs little breaks across the day, and as opposed to massing voice use. So I'd say that that's probably the most important thing that
Well
I teach
said.
is the vocal
Well
overduring.
said. And let's make this a discussion too, so if you have a thought, don't feel free to pipe in, and we'll keep our remarks brief so we can keep this moving. But I just going to, true confession, what you said about getting sick. So I almost always, if I'm thinking about it, use a piece of clothing to open doors. I never use my hands to open doors or to touch things in subways or in buses. I always use something I'm wearing, and it may look a little weird, but I almost never get sick.
Yeah.
So, and I forgot about that a few days
Yeah.
ago, and sure enough, I have a little thing from flying. Flying is terrible, as we know. So I feel that the whole discipline has changed dramatically since I learned because of science. So there's been a tremendous amount of research, a lot of it in Scandinavia, interestingly, and it's taught us a lot about, it's supported in many cases best practices that we've all gotten from Italy, really, from a long time ago, and some of it is really fresh and new. How have each of your disciplines changed, if we could just sort of talk about that?
Well, Dr. Bastian is a rock star in my world, so I was
good.
like, I was so excited. I mean, I love you, but he's
It's all right.
So
it's okay.
I immediately
take it.
started talking about surgery, because I noticed that I got a hold of one of his sheets that has a timeline for post-surgical voice use. And back in my day, you'd be on vocal rest for a couple of weeks, which is death to a singer, and especially after they've had surgery. But nowadays, you have a much different timeline that starts on day 5, I think, with phonation.
Yes.
So I think that's something that's changing. And also the instruments that, it used to be surgery, I think, was a last resort, and it always felt like something that should never be done. But it's definitely changing.
And it's changing slowly because there are still people who go on vocal rest. I mean, John Mayer, the pop star, talked about having a Botox shot, and he was open about this. I've had a conversation with him about it in his folds, just to make him shut up. And it didn't work the first time because it wasn't enough Botox. So then when he had it done again, and he's very open about this, which I so appreciate because, it's important to understand. But we'll get to vocal injury later on. So going to training. So in my early experience, teachers guarded their secrets religiously and died with them, in fact. So now we're in the world of Skype sessions and online teaching everywhere. I mean, there are tons of people in Australia, for some reason, who are posting lessons. And, much of it really good. So what are your thoughts about this whole new world of teaching?
I kind of feel similar to Spotify and having music be free, which is, it's really fantastic for the opportunity. I'm a little hesitant due to the fact that there are a lot of folks who claim to be singers or musicians or artists who have not just put in the time and the discipline. And so some of my concern is that everything's so accessible, and what do we know about the background of the people who are teaching and creating the videos, right, and the apps and everything else, because really any of us can do that at this point.
Yeah.
But I do think it's, from growing up and going to school, it's far more accessible, and so there's some great opportunity, but I think it's absolutely imperative that you still have a coach, because that coach is the good cop that can assist in seeing you and hearing you for what you can't hear or see of yourself.
Well, and it's interesting because I think you also have to have a body of knowledge to be able to discern what's
Absolutely.
good and what isn't good.
Absolutely.
And also that person isn't seeing you, and you can't tell by hearing necessarily everything that you would need to know in a lesson.
That's right.
And we were talking about this whole idea of guarding secrets. Do you find that the whole world is much more open because people have written beautiful books about it, et cetera? I mean, now, and also teachers didn't learn after they got their degree or had their career. that was it. They never did any more learning. And you were talking about, you go to a lot of conferences, Melissa. You're really up on the latest ideas. So what's your thinking about this?
You know, it's, in musical theater, well, let me start the other way. Classical singing has been around for a long time, and there are sort of course there are schools of thought, but there is a general respect and understanding for correct pedagogy. Musical theater obviously has been around for a century, but that's not very long when you're thinking about methodology of how things are done. So those secrets are still a little bit more guarded as far as how are people doing it. Most people are not really teaching it. I just was saying the American Voices sort of festival at the Kennedy Center that Renée put together was amazing in the positive battle in respect of different genres and the different technique and pedagogy that needs to be applied to those different genres. So the sort of letting go of the concept of, you know, if you sing classical, you can sing anything, it's all the same, just learn that. I think people are finally starting to not believe that that's the case. And in that process, methods are sort of being patented and then therefore taught, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit for profit still, more than a little bit, you know, the methods, but...
Can you mention the couple you mentioned to me?
Sure. So I've studied Estel, which is a great, I really like that for sort of, it in short talks about different recipes for different styles of singing. And it's a great study in comparison of what's happening in different modes of singing.
And she was actually a person who taught.
Jo Estel.
Yes.
It's great. I love it. Speech level singing, so some people call it that, or Seth Riggs was sort of the founder of that. I also studied that and like that for different reasons. That's just that philosophy is that the larynx stays at speech level no matter what you're doing. I mean, and many other things, but you know, obviously then there's you must, I think, have some bel canto training, I think, to really get that foundation underneath for breath. There's contemporary commercial music or somatic voice work. That's a whole other thing, and that's sort of talking about lots about registration and things like that. So there are different things you can sort of study if you're into pop, popular music theater, things like that, you know, that go astray from classical. And I'm really fascinated by that, so I've studied it all, and then sort of made a fusion.
Has anybody watched Christina Aguilera's online class, a master class? Has anybody seen any of these? It's a very nice price point, and they're beautifully produced. I've seen a little bit of it, but this idea that at least you can go on and get some concepts. Yeah. So I wonder too, if we get back to now, and by the way, for young singers, my feeling is that you're dealing with teaching the foundations, which are breath, and which I think is, you know, how do you intake the most amount of breath? Breath control, how do you use the right amount for whatever phrase? And breath support, which is still a little bit controversial. There are a couple different methods and different schools of thought about breath support. And then I still talk about resonance. And I know resonance is not a word that's always used now in modern day thinking about science. Bright and dark are colors, or, you know, there's certain words that are applied, but I think about, is it head voice? Is there more mouth resonance? Is it as a mix? Is it more chest voice? So does anybody still talk like that, or do you use different words?
I sure do.
You do? Okay.
I know that, in the demands, again, of opera singing, we're trying to maximize the amplification, which is with as little damage to the voice as possible. And the sensations may be different than what's actually physiologically happening, but because the instrument is embedded in our bodies, we cannot push a button and get the result we want. So everything has to be a thought, a concept. And so I do, I'm sort of spatial in the way I talk, but I do talk about, where the primary core of the sound resonates, and I do use that word.
I like it too. It works for me. What are the harmful techniques that you're seeing, and are they different for men and women nowadays?
Pushing, over pressurizing air.
Yeah.
And, the beautiful analogy of the reed, the vocal cords are the reed, but you can brace those vocal folds and push air and get a very loud sound right away. Some teachers do that on purpose to make the singer feel like they've suddenly become an opera singer.
Right.
But, it's like the neck of a balloon, that, sound.
Yeah.
But that's not the healthy way to build the kind of amplification that opera singers need. But it's certainly what I'm hearing a lot of.
Hearing a lot. Oh,
Yeah.
that's not good. And also certainly for your worlds too. There's if you're pushing, and that's using breath pressure. It can also be just imagining that you want to create a huge sound.
That's right.
How do you work with that?
I think for a lot of the kids at Columbia College, some of them, especially in the gospel genre, it's big. It's about sounding big and having power.
Yeah.
And so 2 exercises that I use, one is Mr. Tietze, the straw phonation.
Oh, he's my guy. That's my thing.
Yes, I love straw
I'm his
phonation.
biggest fan.
So that is the ticket. So students always think it's a little odd when I'm like, stop at the 7-Eleven and pick up one of those big straws and get yourself a few on the way out.
Dr. Ingo Tietze, straw phonation. He's not the best person to demonstrate it, because he uses it with his voice. But play around with that. I have found it really useful, and also it will stop you from pushing in the top.
Absolutely, straw phonation. For sure.
About resonance, because the more you use resonance, the less you're having to kind of drive
That's right.
the larynx.
Yeah.
And in teaching vocal health, have you seen those little music box things that you crank? And that's quite effective to teach college students the power of resonance, because you play it in the air and you don't hear anything, and then you can put it on different surfaces and hear the difference in the amplification, and just kind of show the idea that the sound source is the very same for all, but if you do it this way, it's so much louder on a hard surface than it is on a cloth surface or whatever. It's a very good way
To
of
teach it.
showing that idea that resonance is what you want to use for big sound, not muscle.
So, in thinking about harmful techniques too, my sister has been teaching non-classical for a long time, and she was working with high school kids in Connecticut for a while, and she said she was shocked at the number of vocal injuries in high school students. And it's because they're wanting to either sing pop. This was the heyday of American Idol, and I saw lots of kids who had amazing showmanship. I mean, they could sell a song like, when we were kids, we were just standing there petrified, but they couldn't sing. They didn't have technique yet, or really a great sense. So are you seeing this kind of injury come in?
Yeah. Oh, yes. There's a ton of overuse. That's the huge problem, where the mucosa gets damaged from driving the tissues, and the 2 forces that the vocal folds experience are collision from vibration, but also shearing. So the surface tissue of the vocal cord has to be smooth, slide back and forth. So if you use the voice with tremendous power and energy and muscle, then you get this collisional force and this shearing force, and it creates a lot of injury. But the other thing we've been seeing an epidemic of is this term called muscular tension dysphonia. Are you familiar with it? And what happens is people produce the voice with slight separation in the back. And it can be really hard to solve. So we really need you all to
I know a couple
figure out
of
how to
women
get
who
rid of
have
that.
it. I know a couple of women who have
Yes,
it, and they both have to public speak. So what do you think causes it in the first place?
Well, we've wondered if it's high larynx, or I'm just not sure, but what they experience is paralaryngeal discomfort. So they'll talk about discomfort in the strat muscles on the sides of the voice box, and at the articulation between the hyoid and the thyroid cartilage, kind of right here, they become very uncomfortable, and then the high voice becomes effortful, and it's just a huge thing we see again and again.
Well, and I may be opening Pandora's box here, but I think there are some elements of style in various genres that are perhaps creating pathologies, and finding a way to, you know, take the essence of whatever style is required, but still do it in a healthy way. I mean, I hear, you know, breath escaping in a lot of singers, you know.
Well, I wonder
so not
too,
full closure of the vocal cords.
I wonder too, first of all, that's a sort of a style that, you know, sounds interesting. It's part of in pop singing.
Right,
So
exactly.
healthy belt, for instance, or the development of a high range, we talked about this in the master class at the end. Can you both sort of talk about how you help your young singers increase their range, which is different for Julie and I?
Sure. And some of you heard this, but understand, I do a lot of comparison teaching. So saying, you know, if you try this, you know, sing this, and then you'll see how much breath you used. Well, now I would like you to, you know, figuring out how to create a sound using less air or less subglottal pressure, right? Talking a lot to my students about, or demonstrating sort of a lot, trying to decide where to start with this. What was the question again?
So it's about, well, were all of you in the master class? All of you young singers?
Oh yeah, teaching healthy belt.
So you heard, okay, so you heard her describe it, okay.
Right.
Do you have any other ideas about that?
So, you know, it's interesting because I think you really have to, for me, I had to experiment. So no one taught me how to belt.
Oh, interesting.
And for quite some time. And so I would experiment, I would, you know, experience incredible fatigue. Luckily, I've never met Dr. Bastian before. Happy to meet you now. But what I realized in going into that holistic aspect or the sensational aspect, since we don't have buttons, is teaching the student that as weight, trying to take less weight up, right? Because we want to, because we feel that that big old sound is supposed to come with us, and it's not. Also having that visual of feeling your sound more narrow, engaging that nasal resonation. If you listen to the great R&B singers, you hear it, you know? So it's all about that combined resonance. And so just giving them various exercises, again, where they can't push.
Do you teach with amplification in your studios?
I do sometimes, and one...
Because I think that can help.
It can. And one thing I do want to piggyback on that, when Renee was talking about using a scarf, right, to open a door, I so wanted to say, all of my Columbia kids, when you're using those microphones, put a scarf on it.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
So, but going back to that, yes, we do have the opportunity to amplify.
Which that I sang jazz in college, and that really helped me find that smaller sound, because it's coming back to you in a way that you don't feel like you have to push. For classical music, the equivalent is singing in the bathroom or in church. You know, it's like, whoa, wow, that's big. I don't have to do much of anything.
And I was going to say, just to add to that just a little bit, I think that the biggest culprit, especially when you're in your junior high musical or you're singing along with Wicked or whatever, is bringing up a yelling chest, lower register voice beyond where it should go, and making adjustments that aren't natural for yourself in order to get that out. I think that's the leading cause of problems, and the main thing that I immediately start to have to fix.
So the interesting thing about that is that we heard Donica last night, Donica Lynn, right, is her last name?
Yes.
So she just lives up there. Amazing. I mean, just above the staff, and it's sort of like a very flat kind of a placement. I almost imagine that she's just singing above her tongue, and then all the sound is here, and it's no breath pressure, none. So is that a universal way that some of these women can sing that high and make that squall for years and years and years?
Yes.
See, I'm learning too. That's why I love doing this. I love doing this.
Using a lot less air, and I said this in the masterclass, but that does not mean you don't support your sound. That does not mean you're not engaged, but the amount of airflow is less.
So you think you're making, it sounds huge. It sounds like, oh my God, it's going to bring the house down. So you imagine that you're carrying this power up, and yet, on the contrary, you have to get through the break, which we do too, by the way. We have breaks also, and it's also a struggle for young singers to figure out how to get through the breaks without carrying too much weight up. So let's talk about, do you get any rappers ever? Because I've heard some rappers who I think they are not speaking well enough to be able to withstand this schedule. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you heard this? And so they need voice training too, don't they?
I have, with the addition of, with the introduction of Hamilton to our lives, I definitely have sing, you know, because those people in that show have to sing and rap, and understanding how to do that and be on their breath and utilize their breath in the right way and utilize their resonance in the right way, and not sit here, you know, don't try to be cool and sit like this, because that actually will hurt you, you know. So I've actually had to start doing it because of that show.
Yeah, so I think we're going to probably see some injuries from that style of speech too. So let's talk about style for just a minute. Do you work on style with all of your singers, all of you, or do you leave that to coaches?
I work on style.
You do?
Absolutely.
Do your singers scat? Do they all have to improvise?
Absolutely.
And can you tell us how you teach that?
Well, first, there's, of course, the oral tradition of listening, yes, and mimicking. So transcribing solos, both instrumentally and from the great scatters of our time. And then we go into...
They have to literally sit down and notate solos, instrumental and vocal solos? Wow. Good for you. Wow, I guess that's the best way to learn the structure of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then just going into the harmonic aspect and just knowing the language, you know?
Yeah.
So, and I think for some people, they're more comfortable to improvise than others. So that's the other thing, is trying to pull that aspect out of them as well.
Well, improvisation, we're just learning, is really great for your brain. So, and in fact, based on what I'm learning about this, I would suggest that all classical musicians improvise as well. So Laura Breton, am I saying her name, Breton, of America's Got Talent, 13 years old. She won, I think, second prize this last year. What do you think about these child performers who are mimicking adult voices?
Oh, I can start. Well, the word is mimic. You know, a good ear will take a sound and be able to reproduce it. That does not mean they're doing it in a healthy way. As a matter of fact, a child is most certainly not doing it in a healthy way. A child does not sound like an adult. A child does not have a fully developed larynx and set of vocal folds. So they're doing things that are most certainly damaging to the voice.
So what's different about this now, as you know, Beverly Sills and Julie Andrews were child prodigies?
But they had that lovely, sweet, classical sound that still had the girlish quality. And the reason it was so high is because their little vocal folds were small. But they learned good technique from the beginning. And this sort of mimicry, instant success, while it makes for great television and it drums up a lot of interest, I think is really disastrously damaging.
Well, there have been a lot of them actually in the last, I'd say, 20 years, and I don't know of any of the older ones who are still singing as much, you know.
Right.
On the other hand, some of them have just gone and become pop singers, so it's not that they aren't performing.
True.
Do you have the same thing in other genre? Does that exist, the child star?
Yes. Hopefully if they get to the level where they're Matilda on Broadway, that they have teachers, you know, that are teaching them how to do that. But I think that lots of people are, you know, singing. In my day, it was Annie, you know. But I think that changes, and I think that they're doing that without training, right? And that's why we're seeing so many people at a young age with vocal problems.
What are what's going on in surgery right now? We have Adele and Steven Tyler, Sam Smith. I mean, it's just, the list goes on, and they're all, you know, the problem with it, from my perspective, for the artist, is that once it's public, then your audience is always saying, ooh, how are they? How's it going? You know? So is this because surgery is so advanced now, or is it because there are more vocal injuries? Dr. Dr. Bastian?
I think it's become a little more open to speak of surgery. When I first began, singers had a very hard time even recognizing that they had an injury because it suggested that they weren't singing well. And so we have to really explain to people, well, you may be the best singer in the world, but if you just do too much, you're going to become injured. So it's quite a hard thing for the psyche sometimes to admit or to, and I would say in the classical world, it's been much longer to become public with that because it's a stigma. I would say in the classical world more than it is in the pop world. So there are some pop singers who it's just another form of publicity to have an injury and to talk about it. But you know, surgery is really a very straightforward and routine thing, but it's always for otherwise irreversible problems. And of course, as I was saying to Julia backstage, it's so much better to build a fence at the edge of the cliff than to park an ambulance at the bottom. You know, it's really best to avoid because the stress and the cancellations and it's just a terrible thing. When a singer becomes really impaired, it threatens not just what they do, but it threatens who they are. It's a deep threat to them, and so by all means avoid. Prevent.
One thing that's helped me in my career, as I was taught very early on, is this, if something's not going right, to stop and fix it. You know, so all through my career, there have been periods where I've taken a week off or 2 weeks off, just said, I didn't like how that felt, and just stopped and had lessons again or did whatever I had to do to get back on track. And for me, it was because on some level I knew that I was going to lose confidence if I started singing and not trusting what was going to come out. It's a fine line. So that's exactly what you said.
One of the very best things we've encountered is to teach every singer what we call vocal cord swelling checks. So every voice has a muscular ceiling, otherwise we'd sing infinitely higher. And the Queen of the Night would have to sing high A's and B's instead of F sharp or whatever it is. So there's a muscular ceiling for every voice, but there's also a mucosal ceiling where the mucosa just reaches the limit of how it can vibrate. And so what every singer, in my opinion, should do is to figure out where their initial mucosal ceiling is. And you do that by singing voice soprano pianissimo as you approach for sopranos, as you get up to the top of the staff. You do this very tiny, just a single, the first, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. And you just kind of find that place where it starts to do, happy birthday to you. You know, it starts to not quite you can get louder and make it happen, but you find that mucosal ceiling with voice soprano pianissimo, and then you write that down somewhere or you tattoo it behind your ear or whatever, and that becomes your baseline. And now, no matter where you are, what you've done, you know how your mucosa is doing because of that voice soprano pianissimo initial mucosal ceiling. And that's really the fence at the edge of the cliff. You will never, ever be taken by surprise of mucosal injury.
So in other words, if you don't reach, if on any given day you can't get that pitch,
yes,
then something, what?
Well, like a lyric soprano, her initial mucosal ceiling might be B flat, high B flat 5, and some days it's A, and sometimes it's B flat, and occasionally it's B natural. So it does fluctuate a little bit for no apparent reason. So it's a couple of semitones that it varies. But if on a given day you find that it's G5, you stop for a moment and you just play the last 12 hours tape and you say, does that make sense? And if the answer is, oh my goodness, yes, I did this and this and this, then you say, I need to just back off a little bit until my swelling checks are again where they should be. You see, so it gives you, now you can't cancel when the swelling checks are not quite what they should be. You can't do what you do and cancel every time it's a little off. Everybody in the room will have to perform a time or 2 or 3 or 10 when you're not quite right. but you know that that's the case, and you're looking ahead to those days when you can recover. So you're always trying to keep your swelling check, initial mucosal sealing, in the same place.
I'd like to add that Dr. Bastian has a wonderful video where he demonstrates the swell check, and I have all my students go to it. It's something you should make part of your everyday life.
Yeah, you can just go to a free website. It's called Laryngopedia, and you just, in the search window, you type in swelling checks, and it's all explained. It's very systematically explained, and it would take a singer 15 seconds a day to do that.
So do you suggest, for instance, not using antihistamines or, non-drying, being careful about drying things?
It's a wet medium down here, so you don't want to do anything that dries it any more than you need to. But every singer learns. Every singer has their routines and things they learn they can do and can't do. But in general, you want it really wet.
It takes 8 hours to be fully hydrated. Is a lot of drinking for 8 hours. I'm not thrilled with the whole hydration thing, and I love coffee. So, but I force myself to do it. Crystal Light. It's just water. I just think, oh gosh. What about a performance day? What do you tell your students to do on performance day?
For me, I ask them to wake up and work out.
Me too.
And get their body moving, and get their body and breath moving. Making sure that they obviously hydrate, and be consciously aware of what they eat. Certainly depends on how long the performance is, as far as warm-ups. So if they've got a 3-hour gig,
Right.
I'm not going to make them, do
A certain time of day for vocalizing, or is that individual? What do you think? Do you have a best practices?
I think it's individual.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that I feel much stronger on stage if I have worked out, and for me it would be Pilates. It's about core strength. It's about and then I'm taller. I feel taller. I feel more, and I just feel stronger on stage too on performance days. And any other suggestions for performance day?
I like steaming a lot, a lot. That could, and if you don't have a steamer, it's just a really great hot shower that's long, and a little bit of easy vocalization up there. And then I like this guy a lot. So telling them that at some point they need to take vocal naps. Right? They can't have a day where they talk, and go to Great America or something all day and then have the gig. So they have to decide, it's meeting out when are you using your voice, and if you have a huge show that night, that's not the day
I'm super quiet on a performance day. I don't. Yeah.
I would always tell my significant other to leave the house for a number of reasons. Mostly because I don't want to have to talk to anyone. I don't want to have to think about anything.
Yeah.
I just would rather not.
And this goes probably without saying, but speaking over noise, going out at night, people who are on Broadway, for instance, most of them, especially at a certain point, they just don't do it. Go to a restaurant. Why restaurants are so loud, I do not know.
I think I remember maybe being with you, and it was one of those tiled restaurants.
Yeah.
And I think you turned around and said, "I'm sorry, I can't stay." And
Yeah. No, I can't do it.
Can't
So we
talk.
have time for Q&A. So you got a whole panel of experts. Oh, we're bringing microphones around. Okay.
What about food on performance day? Some people talk about carbo loading.
Well, I think you want to. Reflux has been a real epidemic. So I know a lot of people try to avoid things that cause that or aggravate that. I mean, it's not been a real issue for me, but I'm a person who eats before the performance, before I leave. Otherwise, I feel shaky.
Right.
And I live in moderation. I think I try to avoid carbs, but it's really because I love carbs, and I would be, So I just try to do it as a health thing, but I don't have anything terribly special.
And in opera, sometimes you're in the theater. I mean, if you're doing Götterdämmerung, you're there for 6 hours, so you need to bring something to eat while you're there. But definitely.
And it used to be that everybody ate after performances, and that's not a great idea either.
No.
You don't want to go to sleep on that, and it's not great for you.
I would usually do a couple hours before, just so it's
Yeah.
not, you know.
And bring a snack, you know, bring a little, a bag of nuts or something. And I also think it's really personal. I mean, I remember seeing Mark Murphy down a can of Coca-Cola before he sang. And I was like,
Well,
how is this
sugar.
happening?
Sugar.
You know, I was worried about the
Yeah.
burping.
Oh.
You know, but I really think it's, you have to, as a singer, your instrument is in your body. It's so important to know what works for you in your body. What foods. Some people we all digest differently. You know, so I think it's really vital for you to learn about your own personal nutrition.
A couple comments. Salty foods can be a bad problem, and if you hydrate after a meal, absorption of the water is much slower because most liquid is absorbed in the small intestine, not in the stomach. And so,
So
and
drink
then,
first?
I'm sorry?
Drink first?
So I would hydrate before you eat your meal. The other thing, I like your idea that everyone's different. Many singers say not milk products, that's a bad idea. But I remember a tenor from New York who said, before I go on stage, I drink a glass of milk. And so you see how you
Why no
shouldn't...
salt? Dr. Bastian, why no salt?
Because salt keeps fluids from being, it's dehydrating, salt is. So very salty foods. You know how you eat a bag of chips and then your mouth is dry?
Yeah.
That's why, because you're...
I thought salt makes you retain water. Okay, thank you. See, I always learn on these things. I love this. Wonderful. So questions? Yep.
Hi. So you talked about pushing and how that's obviously very dangerous, and that's like one of my biggest fears. I was just wondering how you can tell if you're pushing too much when you're singing, and how you can correct that.
Well, certainly anything that's painful, stop. If you feel strain, or if you have to use your jaw or the base of your tongue to assist in supporting the sound, I mean that's...
If you get tired quickly.
Right, fatigue.
Constriction, you know, if you just feel a little bit, then you're pushing.
Yeah.
Your range can also, you know,
Right.
it gets smaller if you've been pushing over time.
Yep.
It's not a good thing.
Hi, my name is Fleming. I just have a question for Bastian. I love you. You're awesome. I'm a really big fan.
I know, he's a rock
The
star.
question is, I have recently had battles in the past, and I spoke with my doctor, and they talked about speaking voice. I didn't really capture that for you, so I just wanted your opinion on how you should speak every day.
Speaking voice.
Speaking voice.
Yeah, it's one mechanism that you use to speak or to sing. So I don't really, I would say it's really back to amount, and that's speaking and singing. It's the manner. So if you produce speaking voice well, that's much easier than if you're, you know, yelling and shouting and that kind of thing. And it's that spacing. So, I mean, just as we can sing well or not sing well, we can speak well or not speak well. And so the idea is to do both as well as possible.
Well, and I learned too, I went to a speech therapist because my speaking voice has never been great, and it fatigues you. And not to mention the fact that if you do end up in a room where you have to project your speaking voice, it's helpful to know how to do it. So, and she talked a lot about pitch, about how tired you can get if you're using for, you know, you all know what vocal fry is. So, and it's been in style for a long time. So the more you sort of succumb to that style, the more you're going to, you know, press and be tired. So definitely using enough pitch and supporting and using your resonance. So I should be doing that all the
We
time.
talk about reading
Right
to
now.
children. Inside your head, you read to children.
Reading to children?
Inside your head, you know, you
Oh.
don't tell people you're doing that, but you say,
Yeah.
I'm reading to children long ago and far
Yes.
away.
Oh, and that's what I thought. Yeah, that's wonderful. Melissa, do you have anything to add to
I was
that?
just going to say finding your optimum speaking pitch. So if everybody wants to say, yummy,
Yummy.
see how that automatically was a 13-year-old girl. And that also found some resonators. So now say, ba 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 ba.
Ba, 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 ba.
Hello, how are you? optimal speaking pitch is a tad bit higher than you talk, because people love to be lazy. And you'll also, I mean, me included, you'll find that you're supporting better as soon as you do your you'll feel things happen. And so people, we work on singing so much, and singing healthfully, but speaking healthfully, you're speaking way more in a day than you're singing. So it's just as important, if not more, to think about that.
And I think one danger too, for a lot of us, we speak so low, and then we try to project. And I know, especially with a lot of college students, you work in the service industry. And so when it's allowed, whether it be a restaurant or a bar, I tell a lot of my students, talk higher, because that frequency will help cut, and then, through that frequency, and then you'll also support your sound. The moment that you begin to talk higher, you engage. You can't. So as I went down here, I was like, what's up? But the moment that I engage.
If you're in the service industry and you think you're talking to children, that could really help you.
This is true.
Question.
Hi, my name is Sebastian. I'm a grad student at the University of Chicago. By the way, Ms. Fleming, if I could take a selfie with you, that would totally make my day. These questions for Dr. Bastian. What do you think about mouthwash and gargling with mouthwash? Is that healthy for the throat? And also, you mentioned some online resources for voice health. Maybe you could mention a few that would be useful.
Just to be sure I caught that, mouthwash, did you say? Mouthwash, good oral hygiene is good thing, and brushing the tongue, brushing the teeth, and you can gargle with very dilute hydrogen peroxide, gargle and spit and so forth. Now, none of that gets anywhere near the vocal cords, because the vocal cords live inside the airway, whereas what we gargle is just in the food way. So there's a shared area and then the food way, and so you can't gargle to help your vocal cords. Other things Ms. Fleming mentioned, but when you hydrate, you really have to start in advance of the event, because what happens to a person who is chronically dehydrated is, if you decide, okay, 2 hours before this performance, I'm going to really hydrate, your body kind of has a set for the degree of hydration that it normally experiences, and you'll just throw off all of that extra water. And if those of you who don't drink enough, do this test where you take your hydration almost like medicine. You stand up from bed, you drink a glass of water at breakfast, 10 o'clock, noon, mid-afternoon, dinner time. And what you will find is in the first day or two, you're spending a lot of time in the bathroom. And then sort of inexplicably, you'll say, I don't seem to need, I'm drinking the same amount. And the reason is the skin is more moist, the nasal passages are more moist, even the GI tract, there's more fluid left in the GI tract. So, if you think of a dry plant that's kind of wilted, if you want to hydrate that plant, you can't just water it and expect that it's instantly it takes a while for the hydration to occur and work its way through the plant, and it's a little bit like that for us. So you just can't say, oh, I'm going out on stage, I better drink a glass of water. That's too late.
We have room for one time for one last question. Hi, my name is Gabe Lobeck. I teach at Chicago High School for the Arts. I've been to see you, actually. Great. And I teach in my private studio as well, but most of my students are high school students, and they're all required to sing classically, 20 Italian. However, a lot of them are in music theater, and they also want to sing R&B and whatnot. I teach jazz over there, and I also teach classical. So when I heard Danica the other night, I was blown away, because she's got a nasal bell, she's got a heavy bell, she's singing with, a lot of breath, with the chords open, then she pops up in a head voice, and then she does a growl. And I said, okay, well, she's using her false folds. But then she takes it all the way up high. Is that messing her up? I mean, she's taking the growl way the heck up there.
One of the most interesting demonstrations I saw was many years ago. I saw it was actually at Juilliard, and I saw a young soprano. She came out, and she sang part of the Rejoice from the Messiah. And so it was a very well-trained, lovely voice with lots of coloratura kind of capabilities. And then she said, now I want to sing a different way for you. And she took a mic, and she stood there, and she sang with this brassy thing. And the voice teachers in the room were kind of falling back in a faint. And she said, she stopped, and she said, now you think I'm ruining my voice, don't you? But she said, I want to show you something. So she began singing again in that very brassy kind of thing. And she would take the mic away, and then she'd bring the mic back and take the mic away. And it was remarkable. It's like her voice fell right on the floor in front of her. It was such a small sound without the mic. So I think that some popular singers are learning to do this very brassy quality that isn't actually all that pressured. That's what I think is happening. Yes. Oh, and by the way, I say to singers, scream all day long and go to a loud party every night with my blessing, as long as the swelling checks stay perfect. You see, so that's the thing that helps you know what can I get away with and what I can't.
And there is
Swelling
a
checks.
wide variation. I
There's a
think,
wide variation.
in what
Everybody's
one singer can do and what another.
And does it change in life? My last question. I mean, in other words, your voice is not going to stay the same forever, right? I mean, maybe it will.
Yours is.
I don't know,
Yours is.
you know.
I-
But I'm talking specifically about that check.
Oh yeah, well, what happens isn't that the mucosa starts to struggle, but it's the muscles. It's the muscular ceiling of the voice that comes down with the passage of time. So you hear, instead of the soprano who does a happy birthday to, where there's dome like that, it's happy birthday to. You hear it's a little flat and it's a little. You hear that effort. So that's what happens as the voice grows older. And so sopranos stop singing their high C's and D's and stay with A's and G's. Now you can resist that a lot, I think, with training, and it's highly variable. There are occasional voices that keep this amazing ability to sing way high, but there are some singers who lose a very great amount, and it's the muscular ceiling, not the mucosal ceiling.
So besides Ingo Tietz's straw phonation, what I would say to many of you is always warm up with your head voice. Keep
Yes.
your head voice going. That has been a huge help to me. So, and it's good for young singers too. You always want to make sure that you have that.
There's so many contemporary singers right now who do not want to develop, not contemporary singers, but I've noticed my students are so afraid of their head voice.
Is that right?
Oh yes, because they are used to what? Belting, using the chest. And so they don't like how they sound. And so they do not realize that just like an athlete, you must develop that register.
And by a lot of teachers teach men to belt and to actually develop their high voices by starting in falsetto and then descending. So it's really good for everybody.
It is.
Thank you so much. This was a great class.